My name is Jonathan Chan, and I'm a business development manager and lead for app download objectives across Tencent social advertising. So I'm based out of San Francisco, but the mission of our ad bureau is to really help North American marketers how to tap into Tencent social advertising to reach global Chinese users. So it could be Chinese users actually in China. In addition, we are looking into ways that we are having solutions to reach the global Chinese populations across the whole world. So it's been a very much interesting operation in terms of operation as well as an opportunity to help North American marketers to better understand the China landscape. I know that there was kind of a raise of hands. How many of you have ever considered to release your mobile app in the China marketplace? Okay, couple hands up there. Okay, how many of you are just at least intrigued by the topic of China? Okay, great. So for me, for today's presentation, I want to make sure that I am able to demystify what is that China marketplace looking like. And this is very much an easy guide into how do you tap into the Chinese marketplace. Particularly, I want to make sure that this is as simple as possible. So in terms of today's contents, kind of the ABCs here. So I'm going to provide a snapshot of what the mobile Chinese users look like. This is very much of an interesting perspective right here, as much of the mobile consumption in China is much different from what we see here within North America. Furthermore, breakdowns of distribution partners and media platform landscapes. I know we've heard quite a bit about Big Two, as well as what's going on here within North America, but just a clarification of what is out there in China, because the names that you'll hear are a little bit different. And then number three, just considerations on how do you activate performance marketing campaigns in China. This is something that I have been working on since I've joined Tencent, and we've had some very good successful case studies in which we'll show you, I'll be able to show some of the best practices that I've seen so far. So one thing to note is that when you look at the China mobile marketplace, the volume of Chinese smartphone users is 3 times higher than the US mobile population right here. What you see through this chart is that there has been a strong trajectory of growth over the last decade of mobile smartphone users in China. Particularly, what's very much interesting about the China marketplace in terms of internet connectivity is that their first touch point to the internet was not the desktop or laptop as we see here within North America. Actually, it was through their mobile devices. Fun fact, in 2011, the number of mobile internet users exceeded the whole population of the United States of America. Canada population much smaller, don't want to exaggerate too much right here, but the trajectory right here is showing that Chinese smartphone users, over 800 million smartphone users, and the penetration of mobile internet in China amongst all internet users has exceeded 90%. When we look at how comfortable they are in terms of their mobile behaviors, we're seeing that there is a trajectory of growth in terms of how they do perform functions, such as online shopping. One thing to note, especially with m-commerce in China, it was estimated that m-commerce, mobile commerce through mobile payments, hit $1 trillion of $1 trillion American dollars. Apologies right there. 1 trillion American dollars in terms of spend. So many of the Chinese users are very much familiar in terms of online shopping and transacting via mobile payments. Furthermore, there's a lot of online video, as well as the rise of online travel booking. There is a rise throughout the boards. But the thing to note here is that on the online shopping front, it's not like it's the Amazons and eBays of the world that are dominating in China. Online video, you would think it's YouTube, Netflix, and maybe on the OTA side, you'll see maybe Expedia or Hopper. But it's actually local players. And you'll see that in the China marketplace, there's a lot of different types of local players that lead within different industry verticals. When you look at the the OS system breakdowns, China is a very much Android-heavy market, and the brands at play are what we see here within North America, but there's quite a few local players that some of you may be familiar with, and some of you may not be as familiar with. When we look in terms of the OS systems, there's a lot of fragmentation, especially when you look at Android. In fact, when you look at the brands, operating systems, and distribution, what we see across the board for Apple is that it's all on iOS. There's not really that much fragmentation there. But when you look into the Android brands right here, there's at least 300 plus Android app stores. This may sound like a very daunting perspective, but when we look at the China marketplace, there is this trend of a couple of app stores taking the lion's share of the Android app stores. So when you look at what are the top Android app stores, the top 5 Android app stores take up 70% of the China Android market. The top 10 take up 80%. Some of these, again, these are very much local players that are operated. Some of the phone brands themselves have their own Android app stores, as you see with Huawei as well as Oppo. But in addition, some of the tech giants, such as Tencent and Baidu, also have their Android app stores. So the road of activating in China can be a little bit complex because there's a lot of partnerships, a lot of distribution deals that may be done. But especially for those who are in the user acquisition front, how do you look into succeeding in the China market? It might be, sometimes from time to time, I work with clients that want to start out with maybe iOS only, and then kind of find ways to get a little bit more into the Android ecosystem. Furthermore, when we look into mobile media consumption in China, we see that there's a lot of mobile usage in which it almost hits 6 hours a day of Chinese users being on their mobile devices. Some of the top mobile consumption categories out there include communication and social networking, but there's a rise of mobile short form and online video platforms that have really upticked. So Chinese users are very much focused on communication as well as video platforms across the board. So when we look at the top apps that dominate in China, it's not what we see out here within North America. Probably you'll see quite a few different types of social apps. You'll see the Facebooks and Googles. But in China, it's a whole different slew. OK, so there's a lot of different types of apps out there in China that are very much localized in China. There may be some of that traffic that exists here within North America. But overall, these are not the same players that we see that dominate within the North America market. So when you're looking at local strategies across the board, you really want to know, OK, do I have to create separate relationships within all these different apps out here? Particularly, when you look at mobile media consumption in China, there's a few giants right there. Now, in the last slide that we just saw, we saw probably the top 10. And the majority of that top 10 are owned and operated by some of the different parent companies that dominate in terms of mobile time spent in China. So when looking into, when narrowing down the list of who do you want to work with in terms of user acquisition or distribution, one of the biggest things that I work on is more so user acquisition. And sometimes I have to advise my clients, how do you go ahead and ensure that you set yourself for success for the China market? And there's some key components that I personally think are very important. So audiences. What do I know about my Chinese audiences? When I get a request from a client, the client asks me, no, I just want to target China. But China is such a large volume population, and there's so many different fractions of different groups in terms of demographic or environmental factors, as well as geographies across all of China. So what do I know about my Chinese audiences in terms of ages, interests, and geos? Actually, when I work with some of the clients out here within North America, their Chinese audiences differ from that of their audiences across the rest of the world. In addition, platforms. Which one will reach my target audiences? Will they integrate with my mobile measurement partner? So across many of the platforms, there may be a few select mobile measurement partners that are credibly known outside of China that will be able to operate in China. In addition, what type of post-click analysis will my partner be able to provide me? Is it really much automated? Lastly, in terms of creative, what type of creative are you going to be using? What creative actually appeals to the Chinese audience? Are these native in feed? What does my target audience prefer? is a video because my awareness is a little bit low in China, and I really want to boost up my awareness amongst a very brand loyal audience. In addition, it's not all about just doing a quick translation from English over to Chinese. Chinese is a very idiomatic language in which you do need to ensure that you have specialists and creatives that understand the China market, because there's such a differentiation of what are top performing ads in China versus what are top performing ads outside of China. So in terms of being able to gather and sharing your data with your partners, in terms of campaign design and optimization, this is where I work with agencies as well as clients directly to help them understand what that China ecosystem looks like. Furthermore, a lot of the clients may come in with a lot of surface level knowledge. It could be very much anecdotal, third-party studies. Maybe it's just repurposing their profiles of global users. Those are really great social surface indicators in terms of how you want to approach your campaigns. But what's very much more important is having the actual base from your current mobile users, looking into CRM audiences. CRM audiences or customer relationship management audiences are a little bit different in China. It's not necessarily based off of email, what we see here within North America. They actually look at IDFA, IMEI, as well as phone numbers, as how you look into CRM data has different interpretations across the whole world. So I want to make sure that everybody understands what I may deal with on a first-time client experience. And when we look at first-time client experiences across the whole ecosystem, there has been a couple cases where a mobile developer really wants to go into China for the first time, and they see that China is very much one of their top markets organically, but they want to do that paid user acquisition. However, after initial testing, they're seeing a higher cost per registration than expected. They believe that their creative is the most optimized for the Chinese market. And they're close to concluding that the Chinese market is just too expensive or just not as profitable for them. There's a lot of different factors why UA doesn't, some parts of UA don't work within China. But I think the biggest thing when we look at the Chinese audience, again, we're looking at a very large population, over 800 million smartphone users in China. Furthermore, when we look at that 800 million users in China, does the client really know how to develop strategy in China? Again, in this particular case that I've seen multiple times is that from a service level, they do have some anecdotal knowledge. They may have looked up third-party studies. They will probably repurpose some of their global users. Maybe they look at Far East Asian users and just apply it to China. That's not the best way to do that. But what they're missing is really that mobile base right there. In terms of CRM audiences, I think that's one thing to note. But I think another thing to note is that their campaign audiences are very much missing. So when you look at campaign audiences in China, you would tend to see that there are going to be some variations from what is successful within North America over to that of China. So in this example right here, many of my clients actually try to just target within only 1% of users, only 8 million people within China. And that's how, one of those things is that, especially when you do user acquisition in China for a first time, may not necessarily know the market, you really want to actually ensure that you find ways to actually broaden the audiences. So there are some tools within different platforms that do have data management platforms, DMP, as well as actual campaign data that can really narrow down what are your potential sizable audiences right here. So when we look at expanding the size of the audience to 56 million out of China's 800 million users, what we saw here was that although we increased the audience size 7 times, it may not have fit within the surface level knowledge of that advertiser. The cost per registration decreased by 50%, all within 2 weeks. So it's very much important to know that you do have to be a little bit open to different types of targeting that you may not necessarily be open to in the first place across different user acquisition channels. So in conclusion, just when looking at this allows, I think that in terms of best practices right here, just knowing how you roadmap your optimization strategy can be beneficial for Chinese growth, China user acquisition growth. And when you look at different media platforms as well as different audiences, you want to make sure that you are following a very procedural base in order to identify how do you ensure that you are able to succeed in the China marketplace. I hope that, in terms of today's presentation so far, that, there are some key takeaways that you are able to take from home. I believe these slides are going to be available online after this conference. But, some of the key takeaways is when you look at the China ecosystem include that, mobile smartphone usage in China is continuing to grow immensely. 800 million monthly active users out of a whole nation that has 1.4 billion monthly, 1.4 billion. So, and that mobile penetration is definitely growing from time to time. In addition, you do have to think about the local market even more so than you initially think when you apply similar strategies from North America over to other parts of the world. I think that the thing that you do need to know is that China has its own players that really are going to be your gateways to enter the China market. Lastly, understanding and developing a relationship with your Chinese consumers and partners are going to be important, especially as they may know more about the market than you do. And then lastly, just do not actually underestimate the high value of the Chinese mobile population. As seen in the best practice that I've seen, even an expansion of an target audience may be a very good way to actually scale up and get the most profitable user across the whole board.
What is the distribution on the mobile platform, like devices like Apple versus Google? What kind of a distribution? Current distribution, I know it keeps changing, and iOS had a big domination, but what's the?
Yeah, so as Google Play does not operate in China, so it's a little bit different. So what we see normally in North America is kind of like an even split, iOS, Android. In China, it's 75, it's nearly 3/4 Android, and then the other is Apple iOS. And then even within the Android market, there's still those fragmentations of Android app stores. So there are some that take the lion's share of the Android app market in China.
And the average revenue per user for, let's say, gaming or any app is still very, very high on iOS like other markets, or Android is like whatever that's more fragmented market?
So I think it really just depends on the audience, because I think what we're seeing right here, initially your innate thinking would be a little bit iOS because the price point is a little bit higher in terms of getting an Apple device. But right now in China, there's kind of this proliferation of a lot of local players that are creating high value phones in which it is also important to test Android. And I think that when you look at user acquisition, some of the platforms are able to help you narrow down what the price device, as well as what brands you would want to target, what phone brands you want to target across the advertising ecosystem. So how long it took, in an average, how long does it take? So I think it really depends. First, product is very much important. So making sure that you're tailoring your product to the Chinese market. But even there are some apps that are a little bit more westernized compared to Chinese tastes. What I've seen right here is that in terms of that test period, it could be as little as 2 weeks, as long as 2 months, depending on how you want to approach your user acquisition campaigns.
Say I'm a new app trying to, not necessarily a game, but an app trying to crack the Chinese market or enter, let's say, forget even cracking. What are the first 2 or 3 things that I should be spending? Is it more product, having a marketing strategy, partnership, as you said? Like, what are the couple of things that someone who's trying to enter and make an impression in Chinese market needs to focus on?
I think that, definitely it is localization of the app and your creative materials. Finding that, and I think that is mitigated by finding a really good partner, whether it's an agency partner. I know gaming companies are looking to Chinese companies to help them expand in China as well. So I think that, I believe that it's really finding the right partner and who can speak to multiple facets of the Chinese mobile marketplace.
Great.